Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the forge of the Middle Ages, a place of fire, smoke, and endless hammering. On the surface, a blacksmith's life sounds like strength and skill, but the truth is far less romantic. It was grueling, exhausting, and often inescapable. In this long, slow story, we'll wander through the life of a medieval blacksmith, from the first sparks of childhood in the workshop to the ache of aging bones after a lifetime at the anvil. From there, we'll follow fire into another world, the sacred flame of Egyptian alchemy, the hidden cities beneath Cappadocia, and the ancient belief that dreams were the language of the soul. Think of me as your sleepy historian, here to bring you boring history for sleep, not sharp and exciting, but soft, steady, and calming, a slow rhythm for your night. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, you can subscribe to Historian Sleepy 365. It helps keep these long bedtime histories coming, always ready when you need them. So, turn down the lights, settle into bed, and let the sound of the hammer fade into the distance. Tonight's story begins in the smoke of a medieval forge. You wake before the sun has touched the thatched roof, not because of the rooster's call, not because someone roused you, but because the habit has carved itself into your body like an ancient groove. The sky is still pale with mist, yet in the small courtyard, the forge has glowed faintly since the night before. The scent of burning coal mixes with the heat of metal, a wisp of wood smoke and the damp earth floor still clinging to the morning dew. These smells aren't strange to you. They're the backdrop of your whole life, since you were in the cradle. When you breathe in, it's as if the scent clings to your chest, weaves into your hair, and settles on your skin. No one in the house notices it anymore, because they all carry it too. It's the smell of family, of labor, of a kind of fate that needs no announcement, yet everyone understands. In this village, some families are bound to rice fields, some raise sheep, some bake bread, but your family is bound to the forge. To outsiders, it's just a low hut with a faded thatched roof and a courtyard scattered with bits of coal. But to you, it is the entire world. When you were very small, you couldn't yet tell the difference between the sound of wind in the trees and the steady breath of the bellows. That sound was always there, slow, deep, like something alive waiting to be fed. When your father pumped the bellows, air would rush into the fire. The flames would change from dark red to orange-yellow, then leap green at the edges. Each time the metal slid into the fire would give a sharp sound. One you'd later learn was the cry of iron softening. The smells, too, stayed with you. The smoke from oakwood, from hard branches, gathered at the forest's edge. The slow burn of charcoal. The smell of hot iron pulled fresh from the forge, glowing so brightly it looked like a lantern. Then the smell of cooling metal, dissolving into the morning moisture, leaving behind a faint metallic taste on your tongue, even though you hadn't touched anything. Before you could walk steadily, your father would seat you in a far corner of the house, the part of the earthen wall most distant from the forge. Close enough to watch, far enough to stay safe. He said a good blacksmith must learn to withstand heat, the way a shepherd must learn to withstand the wind. When you were old enough to walk, your world didn't expand to the village or the fields. It moved closer to the forge. Your playground was a patch of dirt beside the water tub used to cool the metal. You learned how to step without tripping over stray iron rods. You learned to move back whenever your father raised the hammer. Your games were picking up cooled pieces of coal and lining them in rows, or using small tongs to practice lifting bits of broken stone. Your family's forge isn't large, a half-moon furnace built from clay and straw, an old leather bellows tied to a narrow pipe, a wooden tub of water, and a few wooden shelves stacked with tongs, hammers, chisels, and raw iron. The only light, aside from the flames, comes through a crack in the wooden door and a few gaps in the roof where the smoke finds its way out. On cloudy days, it's nearly dark inside, except for the glow around the furnace mouth. You don't remember the first time you helped your father. Maybe it was a cold morning when he asked you to steady the tongs holding a hot iron rod while he adjusted the lever of the bellows. Or maybe it was when he handed you a small hammer, lighter than the rest, and showed you how to tap the glowing head of a nail. There was no ceremony, no declaration that you will learn this trade. It just happened. The days in the village pass slowly, but in the forge, time is measured by fire. Sometimes you'd sit and listen to your father speak with customers, a farmer needing a plough repaired, a hunter asking to sharpen a knife, a tavern owner bringing a jammed lock. Words were few, mostly nods and silence, because the work said all that needed saying. Over time, you began to understand. To your father, the forge wasn't just a place to make a living. It was like a furnace large enough to hold the whole family, shaping all of you through heat, smoke, and the rhythm of hammers. Your father's back was bent. His hands were calloused, and his eyes always seemed to squint, as if staring into a flame, even out in the yard. From summer to winter, the world outside changed, but inside the forge, it didn't. There was always fire at the center, walls blackened by soot, a floor dusted with coal bits. You lived inside that cycle so long you barely noticed yourself growing. Some children your age had never stepped inside the forge. They knew the smell of fresh-cut grass, of warm milk, of stream water tumbling over rocks. You knew those smells too, but faintly. Most of your memories were filled with heat and metal. You didn't think that was strange. Not until one day a friend of yours walked in, was hit by a wave of heat, and instantly stepped back. "It's too hard to breathe in here," they said, and ran off. Only then did you realize you'd grown so used to the heat you no longer felt it. Each morning you find yourself beside your father in the yard, where raw iron rods are stacked neatly, cold and heavy, lying still, waiting to be fed to the fire. Your father said everything begins in that form, shapeless, coarse. The blacksmith's task is to give it shape, just as time and heat had shaped you. Sitting in the corner by the furnace, you often hear the crackle of fire, the strike of hammer on iron, the hiss of metal plunged into water, a long sss sound followed by the scent of smoke. Sometimes the rhythm lulls you to sleep without you noticing, and you wake in the same position as if the world outside hasn't moved at all. At your age, many children dream of leaving the village, of going to town, of becoming a guard, but not you. The path ahead feels already cast, like the wooden mold your father uses to bend horseshoes. You are part of that mold. Sometimes at the end of the day, when the forge dims, the light softens and the smoke thins, you catch your own reflection in a sheet of unfinished steel. That face now has smudges of soot, fingers stained with iron dust, and a scent too familiar to ever be fully washed away. And you understand, like that iron bar, you've been in the process of being forged for a long time. Not by hammer and anvil, but by time, by heat, and by the weight of days that all feel the same. No one asked if you were ready. In this village, questions like, "Are you prepared?" almost don't exist. That morning, your father simply said, "Work the bellows." His voice was calm, as if asking you to toss more wood into the stove. The bellows, made from old buffalo hide, were clamped between two thick wooden boards, forming a funnel shape, with the tip joined to a clay pipe that tunneled into the furnace. You stood beside it, both hands gripping the wooden handles, opening and closing in rhythm. Each push sent a rush of air into the fire. It sounded like someone exhaling sharply. You learned quickly that this wasn't just about feeding the flames, but keeping a steady rhythm. Too fast, and the fire flared and then sputtered. Too slow, and the coals dulled to grey. Your back grew hot. Sweat crept down your collar. But your hands kept moving. Your father didn't look over, only nodded now and then when the fire surged at just the right time. When the heat finally made your head swim, he gave you a new task. Fetch water. The wooden tub sat in the corner of the yard, not far from the furnace. But with your small hands and legs still unaccustomed to weight, it felt twice as far. You took the bucket, drew water from the shallow well, and poured it into the cooling tub beside the forge. Not for drinking, for quenching iron. To shock it from glowing red to cold and solid. The first time you stood close to watch, your father clamped a rod of burning iron and plunged it into the water. A fierce hiss. Steam burst upward. The scent of hot metal met the cool well water and created something dense and slightly sweet, heavy enough to cling to your face. Your eyes stung, but you didn't rub them. Your hand still held the bucket, and your father was still working. Next came the tools. Hammers, tongs, chisels, the anvil, all thick with soot and grease. You took an old rag and slowly wiped each wooden handle, each steel edge. Your father said clean tools meant a firm grip, a precise job. He likely knew you weren't strong enough yet for real labor, but he still wanted your hands to know the weight, the shape of each one. Each tool had a kind of personality. The largest hammer was nearly as heavy as your whole arm, its handle polished smooth from generations of use. The long tongs always felt cold unless fresh from the fire. The anvil, the size of your own body, had a shining flat top, but its edges were dented, scarred by thousands of strikes. You wiped them one by one, not rushing. Your father said, "Hurry, and you'll ruin it." Outside the forge, life carried on. Through the crack in the door, you saw other children racing past, shouting as they threw walnuts at each other, or chasing a chicken that had escaped the coop. A bigger group headed toward the edge of the village, bamboo rods in hand, ready to fish at the pond. You watched them, but didn't follow. Not because your father had forbidden it, but because you knew the work wasn't finished. It was your first day. And even though your arms ached, it felt like you'd only just stepped onto a long path. The same path your father had walked his whole life. By midday, your mother brought you a slice of coarse bread. You chewed while still polishing a hammer. The bread was hard, crumbs falling to the dirt floor, mixing with coal dust. Out there, the other children were likely eating berries they'd picked, sweet and bursting with juice. But inside the forge, you ate with the heat pressing in around you, the smoke slipping into every bite. There was a moment when you thought, "I'll get used to this." The same way you'd grown used to the smell of iron, the sound of the bellows, the hours of standing without ever sitting down. By evening, your father said,
"That's enough." You set down the rag and stepped back. Your sleeves were stained with soot. Your palms were raw from the rough hammer handles. That's when your father handed you a newly forged nail. Not to use, but as a small gift. "For your first day," he said. "Keep it as a reminder." You held it, cool, slightly rough, with the faintest scent of metal. You didn't yet know that from this day on, each day would be much the same. The same tasks, done faster, done longer, with fewer pauses in between. In this village, children between 6 and 10 often help their families in other ways. Farmers' children lead buffalo to the fields, gather vegetables, thresh rice. The hunters' children learn to string bows, set traps, or tend the fire at the hut. Bakers' children knead dough, mind the oven. They usually work mornings or evenings and play at midday. You were different. The forge didn't know rest. The fire must be kept alive, or else it would take hours to start again.
The water tub had to stay full, the tools had to stay clean, and if a customer showed up unannounced, everything had to be ready. There was no such thing as free time, only time between one task and the next. That night, as you lay down on your straw bed, you still felt the handles of the bellows in your grip, the weight of the water bucket in your arms. In your ears, the bellows still wheezed, the hammer still rang. You were tired, but sleep didn't come right away. Your body still swayed slightly as if following the rhythm of the day. Outside, the laughter of the other children drifted faintly, then faded as they fell asleep. You drifted too, into dreams filled with yellow flames, rising smoke, and your father still standing there, saying nothing, just nodding each time you did it right. You didn't notice your body was changing, not until someone pointed it out. The first time was one autumn afternoon, when an old friend dropped by, Darrell, the farmer's son. He glanced at your hands and asked, "Why are your hands so rough?" Like tree bark, you smiled, shrugged, and kept polishing the tongs. You didn't think much of it at the time. To you, your hands had been like that for as long as you could remember. But that night, staring into the water basin, you looked closely. The skin on your palms had thickened, the creases had deepened, and patches of it had darkened, as if stained forever by smoke. Calluses were the first thing the forge gave you. At first, holding the hammer too long made your hands sting, hot and tender. But over time, the skin grew thick, the softness faded. Your hands stopped noticing light touches. You only felt what was sharp, when a hammer slipped and caught your finger, or when a hot coal landed on the back of your hand. Your knuckles changed too. Each morning they were stiff, and it took a few slow stretches to move them freely. In the cold, a numb ache crept from your fingertips to your wrist, making small tasks feel clumsy. But once the forge was hot, your blood ran faster, the numbness faded, leaving only a dull throb along the tendons. Your back changed more slowly, more silently. In the forge, you rarely stood upright. You leaned toward the furnace, crouched low at the anvil. Day after day, the posture repeated, like a lesson being etched into your spine. At first, it was only an ache at the end of the day. You thought a night's sleep would fix it. But seasons passed and the ache became a steady pressure. Then a quiet pain each time you reached upward. You're not sure which year it happened, but one day your back no longer straightened fully. To others, you always looked like you were searching for something on the ground. Your eyes, too, weren't the same. The forge smoke never truly left. It slipped through every crack, swirled with the heat, and wrapped around your head like a slow breath. At first, it made your eyes burn. You blinked constantly, tears spilling not from sadness, but from smoke biting at the corners. Eventually, you learned to work in the haze, but the price was clarity. In daylight, the sun felt harsh, too bright to face without squinting. At night, your vision blurred slightly, especially when tired. Your father said that's Blacksmith's eyes, so used to firelight that all other light feels foreign. But the clearest change wasn't in your hands, or your back, or even your eyes. It was the smell. The smell of smoke and oil clung to your skin like a second skin. After a day's work, it felt as if it was seeping from your pores. You could wash your hands, your face, even your whole body. But the moment you stepped back into the forge, it returned. The smoke here wasn't just burning wood, it carried the bite of coal, the slick residue of oil from tools, and the heated tang of fresh forged iron. Mixed into that was sweat, not the sweat of running through fields, but sweat baked in by hours of standing near flame, salty with a faint bitterness. You could also smell the leather. From your apron, your gloves. A musty scent, edged with the sharpness of burned hide where sparks had landed. Your clothes frayed with time, but the scent never faded. Even after washing, the steam rose cloudy from the water, and when they dried, you only needed to lift them to your nose to know. The forge was still there. Your clothes never stayed whole for long. The coarse shirt your mother sewed wore thin at the elbows within months, the tears patched with thread in colours that didn't match. Your pants, always dark at the knees, partly from metal dust, partly from kneeling at your work. The leather apron held out the longest, but even it had burn holes from stray sparks, its edges curled and darkened. You didn't have much to change into. One set for work, one set for church or festivals. The Sunday set hung in the corner of the house, used rarely, and even then, despite your care, carried the faintest trace of smoke. No one commented. Everyone knew you were a blacksmith's son. Outside the village, that smell became your signature. At the market, vendors would sometimes say, "Your forge must have been hot today, huh?" Not because they'd seen it, but because they could smell it on you. When you were younger, you felt embarrassed, especially standing near the other children. But as you grew older, you stopped noticing. The smell was something you brought home each day, something your parents and siblings were so used to they no longer noticed either. Your body, your hands, your back, your eyes, your clothes had become part of the forge. Like the tools on the shelf, you'd been worn down, shaved off here and there, notched at the edges. The only difference was that tools could be replaced. You had to keep working with what you had. Sometimes on rainy nights, when the flames dimmed and softened, you'd lie back on the straw bed, one hand resting on your chest, feeling the roughness of your own skin, and you'd know, even if you left the village, the smoke would follow you. Even if you stopped swinging the hammer, your back would still bend. Even if you kept far from any flame, your eyes would still remember the red glow of heated iron. You hadn't just lived beside the forge, you had become a part of it. Mornings in the village never stayed quiet for long. As soon as the sun began to rise, the knocking would start on your wooden door, not once, but many times a day. Some days it was a farmer, hands still caked with mud, carrying a plough blade chipped at the edge. He would drop it to the ground with a heavy thud and say, "Seed goes in tomorrow. Need it fast?" Your father would nod, asking no further questions. That meant the forge would burn all morning, the hammer would ring without pause, and other jobs would have to wait. Other days the visitor was a knight, riding into the village, armor glinting silver in the sun, but when he dismounted he brought a chipped sword in hand, his voice deep, half commanding, "I need this in 3 days." 3 days might sound generous, but in the forge it meant 3 days of juggling everyday tasks while prioritizing the grinding, heating, and quenching of a noble's weapon. Your father always said, never turn down a knight. Not just for the money, but because refusal might invite trouble. Between those two extremes came every kind of person. A shepherd needing shoes for a new horse. The tavern woman asking for a new hinge to replace the rusted one on her door. A hunter dropping by to fix a dagger. Dulled from skinning game, he'd say, each with a request. each with a deadline, and most of them said the same thing: as soon as you can. From where you stood, the forge felt like a market in reverse. Instead of the sellers calling out to customers, the customers brought their needs in, and your family scrambled to meet them. The hard part was that there were no hours, no opening bell, no sign that said closed. Someone might knock before the morning mist had lifted, or late at night when the moon was up, simply because they were passing by and remembered something that needed fixing. One evening, you had just extinguished the fire, halfway through putting the tools away, when a man came rushing in, holding a hoe with a broken handle. He said he had to be in the fields by dawn. Could you fix it now? Your father looked at the darkening sky, then lit the coals again. That was when you understood what he meant when he said, "The forge only rests when no one needs it." And then there were the urgent days brought on by bigger events. News would come. The army would pass through soon. The village would stir with anticipation. Farmers rushed to repair plough blades, to till the land before the roads clogged. Hunters sharpened weapons just in case. Sometimes even soldiers came by, asking for spearheads to be fixed, or simply requesting coal to light their camp stoves. On those days, the hammering lasted from sunrise to well into the night. Your arms ached, your back curled a little more, sweat ran constantly. But the fire had to stay steady. As for payment, not everyone paid with coins. Most didn't. The farmer might bring a basket of potatoes or a few handfuls of grain. The shepherd left behind a wedge of cheese wrapped in leaves. The tavern woman brought a small jug of liquor, along with a promise of discount next time. Knights paid in silver or gold, but such customers were rare. Most of the time your family lived on trade, a form of payment that left you never quite sure what you'd receive on any given day. Some weeks the pantry overflowed with vegetables and bread, but you couldn't afford new coal. Other weeks you had coin in hand, but little to eat. Because the harvest had failed, you once asked your father, "Why don't we just ask them to pay with money?" He only smiled. Money doesn't plough a field, can't eat it. Food keeps us alive. Money keeps us out of trouble. We need both. And in that you began to understand blacksmithing wasn't just about making things, it was about holding ties with everyone in the village, from the poorest to the most powerful. This uncertainty meant the work was never truly done. Finish one order and 2 or 3 more waited. The to-do list was like the coal pile: clear a corner and someone poured more on. There was no real off-season. In spring, farmers repaired tools for planting. In summer, people wanted new blades for butchering or festival prep. In autumn, it was harvest tools. In winter, hinges, locks, horseshoes for long travel. You began to see that blacksmithing didn't follow the rhythms of agriculture. It followed the erratic needs of people, and those needs never stopped. Sometimes you dreamed of a true day off, not out of laziness, but just to feel what it was like to go a full day without the sound of hammering, without the smell of smoke. But then a knock at the door, and the thought disappeared. You stood up, rolled up your sleeves and returned to the fire. The work never waits for your readiness. It finds you. And when you're a blacksmith's child, a day off becomes a luxury, something you've heard of but never truly known. In peacetime, the sound of hammering in the forge beat steady, like the slow heartbeat of the village. You and your father repaired farming tools, shaped horseshoes, made door locks and forged kitchen knives. There was always work to do, but between orders there were still pauses, long enough to catch your breath, wipe your sweat, or step into the yard to watch clouds drift overhead. But when war drew near, everything changed. As suddenly as a fire flares to life from a single hard push of the bellows. News of war didn't arrive by letter. It came in signs everyone knew how to read. A messenger rode into the village, cloak streaked with the dust of distant roads. The townsfolk gathered at the square, listening to a few clipped words about conflict spreading closer. Then, just days later, the orders began to rain down on the forge. At first, small things: daggers, arrowheads, spear tips. Then heavier pieces: iron-plated wooden shields, helmets, and even long swords. These were not tools that could be made hastily. A dull blade could cost a life. A weak breastplate could be pierced in a single strike. Your father said, "Making weapons is making someone's life. Every mistake is a death. That one line made you slow your hammer, made you strike more carefully, even though time waited for no one." In wartime, the forge never slept. The fire was kept burning through the night, because starting from cold took too long. You and your father took turns at the bellows, hauling water, cleaning tools, sometimes even taking up the hammer when he needed rest. Sweat ran like a stream. The smoke clung thick to your lungs. Your eyes stung so much that even closed, they still saw the red glow of iron in flame. Some nights, the hammer rang until the rooster crowed. By then, your hands shook from exhaustion. But the work kept going. Outside, frost formed on the ground, but inside the forge, the heat soaked your shirt with sweat. Wartime customers weren't just villagers. Regiments passed through with wagons full of broken weapons, nicked swords, bent spears, dented armor that looked like it had taken blows from giants. Their deadlines were sharp. By morning, we march at first light. Once, a group of soldiers rented your father's forge for 3 full days. They slept in the yard, ate in haste, and waited their turn while weapons were repaired. The sound of hammering, grinding, and coal crackling turned into a war rhythm of its own, nothing like the lazy pace of peace. Payment also changed. Soldiers usually paid in silver, quick, clean. But sometimes they only handed over a paper note, a stamped promise of future payment from their unit. Your father knew those notes rarely became real money, but he still accepted them. Refusing meant losing business, or worse, inviting trouble. Villagers paid with whatever they had left: a little stored grain, salted meat, a worn cloth. They needed weapons to protect themselves or to contribute to the village's shared defense. But the real pressure didn't come from how many orders there were. It came from how fast they had to be done. In peacetime, your father might spend all morning perfecting a single piece. In wartime, he had to finish 2 or 3 in the same time. Strong enough, yes, but no longer polished. You learned how to shorten every step, how to push the fire hotter to heat faster, how to strike harder to shape quicker, how to quench in less time. Each time you finished a piece, before you could even set it down, someone was already waiting to take it. No storage, no second glance, no pause. Strangely, war made the forge rich. More money, more food brought in trade. Your family could afford better coal, better steel from the town, but the cost of that brief comfort was exhaustion. You watched your father grow thinner, his eyes sink deeper, his hands shake more each morning. And when the war ended, everything went quiet. No more soldiers, no more urgent orders. The forge returned to fixing plows, horseshoes, kitchen knives. The money earned in war vanished quickly, spent on food and materials, because in peace no one paid like the soldiers had. You came to understand something. War fed the forge, but wore it down faster than anything else. The coins earned in those days were like a fire flaring high, bright, hot, and short-lived, leaving behind only ashes and fatigue. Your father once said no one wishes for war, but when it comes, the forge burns brightest. You heard him, but you didn't know whether to feel lucky or cursed. There is no specific day that marks when you've grown old. In this village, age isn't counted in years. but in the quiet, irreversible changes of the body. For a blacksmith, it's when the hand no longer strikes as powerfully as before, when the hammer's blow no longer rings with its old firmness. It's when the eyes must squint to see the edge of a blade, when the back aches too much to keep standing without pause. Your father was no exception. One winter morning, before the coals had fully ignited, he set his hammer down and sat on the wooden stool. Not to rest for a moment, but because, as he said, "My back won't let me stand any longer." In his younger days, he could work from dawn until dark and still have the strength to carry a whole sack of coal into the shed. Now, after only half a day, his shirt was soaked in sweat, his breath uneven. The joints in his fingers had swollen, slightly twisted from years of gripping the hammer. On cold days, those knuckles stiffened like iron left in the snow. His eyes, once so used to the furnace's glow, now blinked constantly, adjusting to focus. He could no longer sharpen a blade with the delicate lines he once drew so easily. That job now passed to you, to younger hands, to clearer eyes. And then, one day, he said, "From now on, you'll strike the first blow." In the village, the first strike on a newly heated bar is more than just a beginning. It marks the blacksmith of record, the one who carries full responsibility for what that piece becomes. It is also an unspoken admission the old smith has stepped back. He now guides, but no longer leads the work. At first, you didn't feel ready. That first hammer strike was heavier in meaning than in weight. But when you held the handle, felt its heat, heard the metal echo through your chest, you knew this path had been yours since childhood. And now, there was no one left to take it but you. Your father stepped back to the far side of the forge. He watched more than worked, occasionally adjusting the angle of your hammer swing or the way you turned the iron. He never scolded, only said things like, "Slower, hotter." On quiet evenings when the fire dimmed, he would speak to you of years before your birth, of wars, of hunger, and of the times he made something so well the customer returned just to say thank you. His voice was low, sometimes interrupted by a dry cough, but his eyes still lit up when he spoke of a sword sharpened just right, or a suit of armor that saved a life. His body declined, but his memory of the craft remained tempered and strong, like steel drawn from water. He taught you not only technique, but how to treat each kind of customer, from the poor farmer with a broken hoe to the knight ordering a custom blade. He reminded you a blacksmith's reputation doesn't lie in the price. It lies in whether people trust that your work won't fail them when it matters most. Still, the weariness showed. On some days after the last customer left, you would find him still sitting by the fire, staring into the last embers as if thinking of something far away. When you asked, he would only say, "I'm glad you're continuing. But I'd also be glad if, one day, you chose to stop." You said nothing because you understood he loved the craft, but he also knew what it took: health, time, and dreams that never made it past the smoke. When he could no longer work every day, his place in the village shifted. People still called him the blacksmith, but now they came to you with their orders. Sometimes they stopped just to talk with him, to remember things he had made. The village children still ran past the forge, but now it was your hammer they saw in motion, and your father sat nearby, hands slowly oiling a tool handle, sorting rivets into a jar. Looking back, he carried both pride and fatigue. Pride that the forge had stayed alight for decades, that it had fed the family through peace and war, that his work had traveled beyond the village to places he'd never been. Fatigue because he knew it would all repeat in you. The calloused hands, the bent back, the blurred eyes, the scent of smoke in your skin. He knew you would face long days, sleepless nights, seasons when the forge blazed bright, but your heart only longed for quiet. One evening, as the sun fell slow and light poured through the cracks in the wall, he handed you the oldest hammer in the forge, its handle worn smooth, its head chipped at the edge, but still heavy, still balanced. "I've had this since I was an apprentice," he said. "Now it's your turn." You took it, and it felt like holding the family's whole history in your hands. He said no more, just sat there quietly, as you hung it on the rack. Old age doesn't arrive with noise. It comes like cooling coals after the fire dies down. But a blacksmith's legacy remains, not just in iron, but in technique, in rhythm, in the endurance passed from father to son. And on still nights, when you work alone, you sometimes hear his voice behind you, soft and steady. Slower. Hotter. If you stand on the western bank of the Nile on a cloudless morning, the first light of day will show you a strange boundary. On one side, a strip of black, damp earth. On the other, a pale sea of sand stretching to infinity. The ancient Egyptians called the fertile strip Kemet, the black land, where life began. The dry sand beyond was Deshret, the red land, where only wind and death resided. From the word Kemet, thousands of years later, Greek scholars recorded and reshaped the sound into chemia, the root of alchemy. But to the ancient Egyptians, this was more than the mixing of metals. It was a philosophy, a way of seeing the world. Everything can be transformed if you understand how to guide the transformation. Walk along the river and you'll see hands turning the black soil. River water soaks into furrows. Seeds sink into ink-dark mud. The farmer knows in a few weeks a grain of rice will sprout, changed from something dry and lifeless into something soft, green, and living. For them, this is the first transformation, and it happens every season. Without the black silt of the floodplain, there is no life. The village potter does something similar, only with clay. He kneads the wet earth, shapes it on the wheel, then bakes it in fire. What was once limp and shapeless becomes a vessel, hard, durable, and lasting for decades. The goldsmith in the market follows a different path. He burns stone ore in a sealed furnace to extract the gleam of gold hidden deep within. 3 different trades, but each carries the same idea: to turn one thing into another, something stronger, more lasting, more valuable. To the Egyptians, alchemy was not a trick or illusion. It was the long, patient observation of those who lived between 2 worlds: the material world, where metal, earth, water, and fire have shape and weight, and the spiritual world, where gods could grant humans the insight to understand and direct change. In temples, those who held the secrets of alchemy were often priests. They believed every metal corresponded to a planet. Every gem carried its own energy. Gold was the metal of Ra, incorruptible, untarnished, radiant like the sun. Silver was linked to Khonsu, the moon above. Copper bore the color of Hathor, goddess of love and music. Their philosophy of transformation didn't stop at matter. The Egyptians believed that the soul too went through change, from the impure to the purified. Their elaborate funerary rites, especially mummification, were a kind of spiritual alchemy, preserving the body, so the soul could journey on into the next world. In inscriptions carved into stone, there are passages describing how the soul must be refined like metal. Its impurities burned away, leaving behind only what is pure. As gold is separated from ore, so is the soul from its sins. Later, chemia came to mean not only the black land, but also the cosmic forge. an image used by Egyptian priests to describe the universe itself. They imagined the cosmos as a great furnace, with the gods as master smiths, shaping all things with fire, water, earth, and air. Humans, by learning the secrets of the elements, could imitate this divine process. In their furnaces, their pottery kilns, even within their own bodies. If you walked into an ancient Egyptian metal workshop, you wouldn't see just coal and hammers. You'd see clay jars holding strange liquids, colored powders, and symbols carved or painted on the walls. These were not decorations. They reminded the smith of the connection between his work and the divine. Each time metal was heated, it wasn't just about controlling temperature. It was about reciting prayers, seeking divine permission to transform. A good copper blade wasn't just the result of skill. It was proof the gods had agreed to the process. When the Greeks came to Egypt, they were astonished by this blending, science, craft, and religion woven together like threads in a single cloth. They learned how to read flame color to judge heat, how to choose clay that could withstand fire, how to combine metals to alter their nature. But they also brought home the mystical side, the idea that matter and spirit follow the same law of transformation. And so chemia became alchemia in Arabic and finally alchemy in the languages of Europe. Standing by the Nile today, it's hard to imagine that from these black fields an idea could travel halfway around the world and survive for thousands of years. But to the ancient Egyptians, that was only natural. Because everything, from a seed to a soul, from a lump of ore to a sharpened blade, is only at one point in its journey of becoming. And if you are patient enough, wise enough, you can guide that journey to wherever you wish it to go. If you were to step into an ancient Egyptian temple at dawn, when the sun had only just brushed a pale stroke of gold across the stone walls, you might hear the steady chanting of the priests. Through the haze of burning incense, their words were not only prayers, they were formulas, secrets, and inscriptions said to belong to Thoth, the god the Egyptians revered as the embodiment of wisdom and magic. Thoth was not a god of brute strength or war. He was the god of writing, of language, of knowledge, invisible forces capable of reshaping entire civilizations. In carvings, Thoth was often shown with the head of an ibis, its long, curved beak poised over a writing tablet, recording the events of the world. The Egyptians believed it was Thoth who taught humans how to write hieroglyphs, how to measure time by the moon, how to track the Nile when it shifted its course. But more importantly, Thoth was the keeper of the secrets of transformation, not only of matter, but of the soul. According to legend, Thoth possessed an object called the Emerald Tablet, a green stone engraved with cryptic symbols and phrases. The Greeks and later the Arabs would call it the Tabula Smaragdina, believing it held the ultimate formula of alchemy. The Emerald Tablet was not a long scroll, but a brief text, only a few lines, and yet each line was thick with meaning. Among its teachings was a principle of cosmic reflection. As above, so below. As below, so above. According to alchemists, this meant that whatever happens in the small world around us mirrors the structure and laws of the greater universe. A single grain of sand contains the order of the stars. A single drop of water can reflect the ocean. Another line from the tablet speaks of the union of opposites, heat and cold, dry and wet, light and dark. To the alchemist, these are not contradictions, but two sides of the same thing. And transformation occurs only when they are brought into perfect balance. The ancient Egyptians who lived between black soil and red sand, between flood and drought, understood this intimately. For them, alchemy was not about making gold, it was the art of finding balance, of guiding everything toward its most perfected form. Picture yourself in a small stone chamber. deep within a temple dedicated to Thoth. The walls are carved with raised images of the ibis-headed god standing among the stars, holding a softly glowing tablet. Light from a narrow window strikes a green slab of stone in the center of the room. The symbols etched on its surface are not meant for everyone. Only for those who have spent years in disciplined study can understand the meaning behind each line. Each symbol holds not just a sound but a force, representing water, fire, air, earth, and the states of the human spirit. To read a single phrase from the tablet is to initiate a transformation, or so the priests believed. When the Greeks conquered Egypt, they copied these inscriptions, layering them with commentary and reshaping them through their own philosophies. They saw the emerald tablet as a key, a way to understand the link between the human and the cosmic, and the foundation of Western alchemy. Medieval Arabic scholars translating Greek texts preserved the name Alchemia and gave it a sharper focus. The search for the philosopher's stone, a mythical object said to turn base metals into gold and grant immortality. They believed the idea itself had begun with Thoth and his green tablet. But in ancient Egypt, the tablet's power was not in making gold in any literal sense. It was a symbol of hidden knowledge, something not easily grasped, accessible only to those with patience, discipline, and reverence. To ordinary people, Thoth was the god who ensured fair judgment after death. But to the priests, he was the one who opened the door to a deeper understanding of both matter and spirit. The Emerald Tablet was a reminder that all transformations, whether of metal or of the soul, follow the same eternal laws. Today, no one knows if the original tablet ever existed or if it was always myth. But the idea it carried lives on, hidden in medieval alchemical texts, in cryptic proverbs, and in carved symbols on the remaining temple stones of Egypt. If you sit quietly in an abandoned sanctuary, as the afternoon sun threads between pillars of stone, and think on the words, "as above, so below," you might feel a strange stillness, as if the heavens and the earth were mirroring each other, and you were simply a small part of that endless reflection. Egyptian alchemy did not remain still along the banks of the Nile. Carried by traders, scholars, and even soldiers, it crossed deserts and rivers, reaching another great civilization, Persia, where it encountered a wholly different current of thought, Zoroastrianism, the faith of the sacred fire that never goes out. In the fire temples of Persia, a single flame could burn for decades, even centuries, and it was never allowed to die. That flame represented Asher, cosmic order, truth, and the light of Ahura Mazda. The firekeepers, usually priests, were not merely guardians. They were men who understood how fire transformed, baking clay into brick, refining ore into metal, burning away impurities to leave behind the purest form. To them, fire was not just a tool, but a symbol of purification, an idea closely aligned with Egyptian alchemy. But in Persia, the spiritual dimension ran deeper. The transformation of matter was a metaphor for the transformation of the soul, from the corrupted to the pure. When the Persian Empire expanded its territory, these ideas traveled with it. By the 7th century, with the rise and rapid spread of Islam, Persia became one of the intellectual centers of the Islamic world. The libraries of Baghdad, Nishapur, and Isfahan began collecting and translating works from Greece, India, and Egypt, including alchemical texts. In this environment, alchemy began to evolve. No longer only a mystical art, it began to meet science, with written records, repeated experiments, and careful comparisons of results. One of the most prominent figures of this period was Jabir ibn Hayyan, known in the West as Geber. Jabir lived in Kufa, in what is now Iraq, but his knowledge came from a wide-reaching network of study. Egyptian alchemical traditions, Persian refining techniques, and the mathematics and geometry of Greece. He believed all matter was made of four basic qualities: hot, cold, moist, and dry, and by adjusting their proportions, one could change one substance into another. The idea still bore the flavor of mysticism, but his approach was different. He repeated experiments, kept careful notes on process and results, and sought consistency over marvel. In Jabir's workshop, you would not find temple rituals like those of Thoth. Instead, you'd see workbenches lined with glass jars, distillation flasks, steam pipes, and steady burning coals. Jabir and his students extracted acids from minerals, tested how metals dissolved in various solutions, and timed their reactions with simple mechanical tools. Every failure was documented and each attempt refined. Because of this, Jabir is often credited as the father of experimental chemistry. Though he still wrote about the philosopher's stone and other traditional goals of alchemy, his method stepped out of the shadow of myth and into the light of observation and logic. In the Islamic world, knowledge was never locked into one language. Jabir's works were copied, translated into Latin, and carried into Europe. There, they deeply influenced medieval alchemists, from Albertus Magnus to Roger Bacon. And intriguingly, as European scholars read these texts, they still found traces of Egypt and Persia within: the purifying flame of Zoroastrian fire, the transformational philosophy of chemia, the sacred fire of Persia, and the flame of Egyptian alchemy, though born of different religious worlds, burned by the same principle. Fire is a force of both destruction and rebirth. It can reduce wood to ash, but also draw gold from stone. It can consume, but it can also reveal. And when this fire entered the laboratories of the Islamic Golden Age, it became the engine of centuries of experiment and discovery, not just in the search for gold, but in the quest to understand the very nature of matter and change. Today, when people think of alchemy, they often imagine medieval Europe, but if you trace the path backward, you'll see that it began in the black earth of Egypt, passed through the undying fires of Persia, merged with the intellect of the Islamic world, and only then crossed the sea into the West. Its footprints may not remain visible in the sand, but they are etched into formulas, instruments, and principles that modern science still carries forward. If you were to stand on the banks of the Guadalquivir River on an autumn morning in the 12th century, you would see the city of Córdoba stretching out beneath a thin layer of mist-red tiled roofs, interwoven with Moorish-style arches and narrow winding streets like veins leading to its heart. At that time, Córdoba was more than just a city. It was a bridge between the Islamic world and Christian Europe, where knowledge from the East flowed westward like an unstoppable current. Alchemy, along with medicine, mathematics, and astronomy, followed the routes of trade and scholarship into Europe. Arabic manuscripts, many of them translations from Greek, with roots tracing back to Egypt, were copied and stored in Islamic libraries in Toledo, Seville, and Granada. As Christian scholars began learning Arabic to read these works, they absorbed not only technical knowledge but also the symbolic thinking and philosophical frameworks tied to alchemy. In Toledo, a renowned group of translators, often called the School of Translators of Toledo, spent decades converting the works of Jabir ibn Hayyan, al-Razi, and others into Latin. This translation was more than a linguistic exercise. It was a cultural shift. A term for an element in Arabic might be explained using Aristotle's concepts, and then tied to a biblical passage about divine creation. As a result, when alchemy entered Europe, it came wrapped in new clothing, a blend of early experimental science, Greek philosophy, and Christian theology. In monasteries across France, Germany, and England, monks began copying and studying these alchemical texts. They were interested in transforming matter, not merely for wealth, but for spiritual purification. Just as ore needed to be heated to remove its impurities, so too must the human soul undergo trials to shed sin and reach spiritual perfection. The image of the philosopher's stone emerged during this period as a dual symbol. For practicing alchemists, it was the mysterious substance that could turn base metals into gold. For theologians, it represented God's grace, capable of transforming a sinful soul into a saintly one. This blurring of the literal and the metaphorical made alchemy both a scientific and a deeply religious pursuit. In castles and noble houses, small laboratories began to appear, flickering firelight in the forge, curved glass tubes, jars of red, blue, and yellow powders. These resembled both a craftsman's workshop and a miniature altar. Alchemists stirred solutions while reciting scripture or quoting Aristotle, believing they were recreating God's act of creation on a smaller scale. Over centuries, alchemy in Europe retained its core, the idea of transformation, but also adapted to new contexts. Here, it had to face theological debates. Did humans have the right to interfere with God's work? Some clergy called it arrogance, others saw it as a path to deeper understanding of divine will. These debates didn't weaken alchemy, they deepened its intellectual roots. New universities in Paris, Bologna, and Oxford began offering subjects related to alchemy, sometimes under the names chemistry or the metallurgical arts. Interestingly, even as it brought new tools and techniques to Europe, alchemy kept part of its mystery. Manuscripts were often written in cryptic symbols, riddled with metaphors and hidden meanings. Not everyone could access this knowledge, only those trusted by a master were allowed to learn in full. This secrecy turned alchemy into something that was not just a science, but also an esoteric art. Looking back, alchemy's journey from Egypt to Europe was a continuous series of transformations. In Egypt, it was a fusion of natural observation and spiritual belief. In Persia and the Islamic world, it blended sacred fire with experimental methods. In Europe, it was cloaked in theology and philosophy. Like a metal refined through repeated smelting, alchemy changed form, but preserved the shine of its original idea: everything can be transformed. Imagine stepping across the threshold of a laboratory in Europe at the end of the 17th century. The room is not tucked away in a dark stone cellar or hidden behind a castle wall like the alchemical workshops of old. It is brighter, more open, more orderly. Sunlight pours through a small glass window, catching the edges of clear glass jars lined neatly along wooden shelves. The work table is wide and clean, with sheets of notes spread out beside a finely crafted brass scale and an hourglass counting each passing moment. The air carries a faint mixture of linseed oil, metal, and a trace of smoke from the coal fire, but it's not thick or suffocating like in older alchemical labs. Here, everything seems to rest precisely where it belongs, tidy, like the lines of script on the page. The age of enlightenment is drawing near, and with it comes a new spirit, a spirit of reason and clarity. Tales of the philosopher's stone and the transmutation of gold still circulate, but their enchantment is gradually giving way to a new hunger to understand the real laws of nature. In this context, Robert Boyle emerges. Born in Ireland, Boyle, like many intellectuals of his time, remained fascinated by alchemy, but he approached it with methodical skepticism. He wanted to test, to observe, to record, and most importantly, to create results others could replicate. In 1661, Boyle published The Skeptical Chymist. This book, with its precise language and clear reasoning, was nearly a declaration. Chemistry must free itself from the mists of mysticism. Science, he argued, should no longer rely on the authority of masters or secret recipes, but on experiments, evidence, and repeatability. A century later, in Paris, another figure would carry that transformation further: Antoine Lavoisier. His laboratory was one of the most advanced of its time, equipped with balances so precise they could detect even the slightest changes in mass during combustion or reaction. Lavoisier did more than experiment. He crafted a new language for chemistry. He named and classified elements systematically, replacing the colorful cryptic names of alchemy like mercurial spirit of Saturn or essence of the sun with clear terms intelligible across nations. With his discovery of oxygen's role in combustion and respiration, Lavoisier shattered the old belief in phlogiston, an invisible substance alchemists believed was present in everything that burned. It was a turning point not only because it was correct, but because it proved even the most beautiful and long-held theories could be overturned by new evidence. Laboratories of this era looked nothing like the traditional image of alchemy. There were no divine murals on the walls, no cryptic riddles in notebooks. Instead, everything was transparent. Formulas, measurements, and procedures were recorded and shared so that anyone with the knowledge and tools could reproduce them. Alchemy, once the bridge between mysticism and science, was now quietly stepping off the stage. But it didn't disappear. It left deep traces in language and thinking. Even the word chemistry still comes from alchemia, the Arabic term rooted in Chemia, the black land of Egypt. Many modern tools, distillation furnaces, round flasks, condensation tubes are direct descendants of alchemical instruments. As the 20th century arrived, alchemy unexpectedly found a new life, not in chemical labs, but in the analytical psychology of Carl Gustav Jung. The Swiss psychologist spent years studying medieval alchemical manuscripts. He noticed that many images in alchemy heating metals, purifying dross, uniting opposites, mirrored the psychological stages of human growth. To Jung, the furnace was not in the world outside, but inside the mind. When a person confronted the darker parts of themselves, the rejected memories and emotions, they were like an alchemist smelting ore. The process was painful, energy-consuming, but if endured, it would yield something purer. He called the final state of harmony conjunctio, the union of opposites in the soul, like two metals fused into a new alloy. Thanks to Jung, alchemy was no longer dismissed as mere superstition. It became a rich symbolic system used to describe personal transformation and psychological healing. Many therapists, artists, and writers have drawn inspiration from its images, using it as a vocabulary for human experience. Today, you can still find alchemy's legacy in many forms, even if its appearance has changed. In science museums, you'll see glassware, furnaces, and ancient manuscripts. In literature and art, the philosopher's stone still appears as a symbol of longing. In psychology, alchemical diagrams are used to explain the inner journey of healing and self-discovery. Alchemy, true to its own philosophy, never vanished. It only transformed. If you look back across the entire journey, you'll see a story stretching over millennia. Beginning in Egypt's Black Earth, alongside the Nile and the god Thoth. Blending into Persia's sacred flame, then entering the experimental laboratories of the Islamic world. Crossing into Europe through Spain, donning the robes of Christian theology and Greek philosophy. Stepping away from science in the Enlightenment, but leaving a lasting imprint. And finally, reawakening in modern psychology as a metaphor for the soul's transformation. It is a long journey where every step reflects humanity's unchanging desire to understand and to guide transformation in matter, in the world, and within ourselves. Winter, 1963. Cappadocia, Turkey. The air is cold and dry. Not the kind of cold that soaks through your coat, but a crisp, clear chill that makes the air feel almost brittle each time you breathe. In a small village, pale yellow tough stone houses sit quiet beneath a silver-grey sky. Narrow paths twist between weathered stone walls worn smooth by time. A man named Ali Demir is repairing part of his home's interior wall. His chisel taps in steady rhythm, the sound echoing softly in the quiet air. It's a routine task. These houses always need reinforcement. The stone is soft and prone to collapse, but then, as Ali removes one of the stones, he finds not compacted soil behind it, as expected, but a dark, yawning void. He bends down, holding a small oil lamp into the gap. A narrow shaft of golden light cuts into the blackness. A rush of cold air rises to meet him, carrying the damp scent of old earth and stone, a smell both unfamiliar and ancient. Ali braces himself and slips through the narrow gap. Behind it lies a small chamber with a rough, vaulted ceiling, its stone walls still marked with tool chiselings. Beneath his feet, the ground is flat, not chaotic, like a natural cave. The deeper he walks, the more he realizes this is not just one room. Passageways stretch ahead, leading into larger spaces, sloping lower and lower, like the beginnings of a labyrinth. When the news spreads, archaeologists arrive and begin exploring. They soon realize that what Ali stumbled upon is Derinkuyu, a vast underground city carved out by human hands thousands of years ago. Derinkuyu is not just a few connected tunnels. It's a multi-level network that descends more than 85 meters underground. 18 levels, possibly capable of housing 20,000 people, along with livestock and food supplies. Each floor includes living quarters, storage rooms, kitchens, stables, wells, churches, even a school. What astonishes researchers most is the level of engineering. Vertical shafts connect the tunnels for ventilation, allowing fresh air to reach even the lowest levels. Massive, circular stone doors, some weighing hundreds of kilograms, stand at key passageways designed to be rolled shut in defense. The water wells are designed so that enemies on the surface can't poison them. Light in the deeper levels comes only from oil lamps. Black soot still marks the ceilings, silent witnesses to centuries of life lived underground. No one knows exactly when Derinkuyu was built. Some believe the Hittites began it in the 15th century BCE, later expanded by the Byzantines. Early Christians may have used it to hide during persecutions. Over time, the city grew and linked to other underground networks, forming a vast web beneath Cappadocia. Imagine life here. You descend a narrow staircase, the daylight above fading to a faint shimmer. Surface sounds vanish. In their place, footsteps, the clink of tools, children's laughter echoing through stone. The air is cool and steady year-round, around 13 to 15 degrees Celsius, in sharp contrast to the harsh weather above. In wide rooms, families gather around small fires. Smoke rises, guided out through hidden vents. Food is stored in stone pantries where the temperature keeps it fresh. Fresh water comes from deep wells, cleaner and safer than sources on the surface. With its scale and complexity, Derinkuyu wasn't just a temporary hideout. It was a city in every sense, but inverted. Everything underground instead of above. More importantly, it's proof that ancient people were far more capable, far more sophisticated than we often assume. Those who visit Derinkuyu for the first time often describe a particular kind of silence. Not the silence of abandonment, but something thicker. As though stories, lives and memories have seeped into the stone and lingered. Every step, every curve of the passageways raises the same quiet questions. Who walked here before me? How did they live, and what did they fear or hope for? From one man's accidental discovery in 1963, the world learned of one of the largest underground constructions ever made. But Derinkuyu is only one part. Cappadocia hides dozens of other subterranean cities, many still unexplored. They lie dormant beneath soft volcanic rock like sleeping memories, waiting for the strike of a chisel to open a doorway into another world. If you stand on the edge of a cliff in Cappadocia on a windless afternoon, you may hear your footsteps echo gently into the ravines below. The rock here is pale yellow, sometimes tinged with grey or pink, softer and more porous than granite or basalt. This material called tuff was formed from compressed volcanic ash over millions of years. For human hands, tuff is a special material. It's soft enough to be carved with simple metal tools, but hard enough to retain its shape for thousands of years if not exposed to direct rain or wind. This is the secret behind how ancient people built entire underground cities without cement or complex structural supports. The work began with a small entrance just large enough for a person to crawl through. Workers used iron hammers and chisels, cutting into the rock one strike at a time. The sound of metal hitting stone echoed through the chamber, blending with the soft rustle of falling dust. They didn't dig at random every tunnel, and room was pre-planned. One group would dig, while another hauled the debris out in baskets, forming a steady rhythm of labor. Thanks to the lightweight tuff, transportation was less grueling, though still exhausting in the enclosed space, lit only by small oil lamps. One of the most astonishing features of Derinkuyu and other underground cities in Cappadocia is the flow of fresh air even in the deepest levels. This is due to a network of vertical ventilation shafts dug straight down from the surface. These shafts not only brought fresh air into the city, but also allowed smoke and heat from cooking fires to escape. Many shafts were cleverly disguised above ground to look like wells or natural rock hollows hidden from enemies. If you stand at the bottom of one of these shafts and look up, the light is just a faint dot far above. A constant, gentle breeze flows downward, carrying scents from the outside world: dry grass, damp soil, a subtle reminder that the surface still exists above. A signature defensive feature of Cappadocia's underground cities is the stone doors. These are giant solid rock discs about 1.5 meters in diameter, 30 to 50 centimeters thick, and weighing hundreds of kilograms. Each one was set into grooves in the tunnel walls and could be rolled into place to seal off a passage. Normally the doors were left open, but in times of danger a few people could roll them shut from inside, blocking the way completely. A small hole in the center allowed for viewing or for weapons to be thrust through. These doors were placed in narrow choke points where enemies couldn't advance in numbers. They acted as both physical and psychological barriers, forcing intruders to pause, giving defenders the upper hand. Deep underground, the temperature remains a steady 13 to 15 degrees Celsius year-round, with moderate humidity ideal for food storage. Ancient people carved storage rooms with shelves and niches for clay jars filled with grain, wine, olive oil. There were dedicated water chambers and others for fruits and vegetables, all arranged to rotate supplies as needed. In some underground cities, even livestock pens were built on lower levels, where the body heat of animals helped warm upper chambers. The sounds of goats and sheep, the scent of hay mixed with animal breath, gave a vivid sense of life contrasting with the quiet corridors nearby. The underground spaces weren't just scattered chambers, they were organized like a network. Main tunnels led to living rooms, storage areas, kitchens, and communal spaces such as chapels or schools. Side tunnels connected to nearby villages or other underground cities, some routes stretching for kilometers. Builders designed gentle slopes so people could move easily, even when carrying loads. Stairs were wide and shallow to ease footing, even when burdened. If you pause and imagine yourself standing in one of those silent corridors, untouched for centuries, you might hear echoes of the past, the chisels striking stone, the steady shuffle of footsteps, the heavy breathing of porters, voices calling through the tunnels. It all seems to continue, even as time above ground has long passed. The soft rock of Cappadocia, combined with human ingenuity and planning, turned a volcanic landscape into a secure, subterranean world, where thousands could live, take shelter, and even build full communities entirely underground. If you descend a stone staircase deep into the earth of Cappadocia, the first thing you notice is not the darkness, but the sudden shift in the air. Above ground, the air is dry and carries the scent of dust, sometimes mixed with hay or livestock from nearby villages. But just a few steps down, everything changes. The air becomes cool, slightly damp, and somehow heavier, wrapping around your skin like a thin blanket. The sunlight above quickly fades into a pale grey-blue streak, while ahead, the soft flicker of an oil lamp casts yellow reflections on the smooth stone walls. Down here, life does not follow the rhythm of the sun. There is no dawn peeking through windows, no long dusk stretching over rooftops. Time is measured by repetitive tasks, lighting the communal hearth, herding livestock into their pens, retrieving food from storage, or gathering in the small chapel for prayer. Morning in the underground world might begin with a rhythmic tapping on the ventilation shaft, a simple way to awaken everyone nearby. As the sound echoes through the tunnels, people know that a new day has begun, even if it's raining, sunny, or snow-covered above. Families lived in rooms carved into stone spaces just large enough for a few mattresses, some wooden chests, and a small kitchen corner. In these kitchens, fires fueled by wood or dried dung sent smoke up through ventilation shafts, leaving behind a thin layer of soot on the ceiling. The smell of smoke mingled with the scent of olive oil from clay lamps, creating a familiar fragrance that residents came to know as the smell of home. In wider hallways, children played tag, their laughter echoing and blending with the footsteps of adults going about their chores. Food was carefully preserved. In the deepest, coolest levels, storage rooms held large sealed ceramic jars filled with wheat, barley, dried legumes, and sometimes dried fruit or honey. Wine and olive oil were stored in separate jars, lined up against the walls to avoid tipping. The constant year-round temperature prevented mold, and during sieges or times when no one could go outside, these stores became the lifeblood of the entire community. Each time food was taken, the keeper would mentally track the amount used, sometimes carving simple symbols into the wall to avoid confusion. Religion played a vital role in underground life. Some levels contained small chapels with higher than usual domed ceilings and smoothed walls, sometimes carved with crosses or geometric patterns. During prayer, residents gathered in these spaces where dozens of oil lamps lit the room, creating a sense of warmth and holiness in the cold earth. The sound of hymns filled the space, their echoes long and layered, making the room feel larger than it truly was. On major feast days after prayer, people shared bread, wine, and stories from their families. Community bonds here were remarkably strong. In a closed environment, people relied on each other to survive. If someone fell ill, neighbors brought food, prepared medicine, or watched their children. Children roamed freely between families, and caring for them was a shared responsibility. No one was ever truly alone just beyond a thin stone wall. Another family could hear you singing a lullaby or hammering a tool. This closeness also meant that conflicts had to be resolved quickly, as there was no distance for avoidance. The underground space gave rise to unique sensations. The silence here was unlike that on the surface. It was heavier, more enveloping. You could hear the tiniest sounds, a drip of water falling from a shaft, the clink of a spoon in a bowl, the breath of livestock. Each level had its own scent. Near the kitchens, the air was rich with smoke and baked bread. Near the storerooms, the smell of grain and earth. Near the livestock pens, the warm scent of breath and hay. Day and night blurred into one. With no view of the sky, people lived by the rhythm of the community. Oil lamps and daily tasks were their clocks. There were long nights when snowstorms raged above and only the distant howl of wind through the shafts reached below. Otherwise, a stillness so complete it felt almost frozen. There were times, too, when war or outside threats forced people to remain underground for weeks, even months. In those periods, the enclosed rhythm of life became normal, and the sounds, smells, and lights of this world became everything. Living underground was not merely a safety measure, it was an adaptation to the environment. The stable temperature shielded them from summer heat and winter cold. The close quarters conserved fuel and light. The clever ventilation systems ensured a steady flow of air, avoiding suffocation. For ancient Cappadocians, this world wasn't a temporary shelter. It was a natural part of life, a reversed village, where the roof was the earth, and the sky existed only in memory. If you stand still in a corner of a corridor, turn off your lamp and close your eyes, you might imagine hearing the footsteps of those who lived here hundreds of years ago, children running past, someone calling from the next room, or the soft voice of a woman singing as she kneads dough. All of it blurs together, a haze of sound, not distinct but familiar, as if the stone had remembered and was still playing it back across time. Beneath the soft rock of Cappadocia, underground cities like Derinkuyu are more than feats of engineering. They are testaments to the human ability to build an entire world in darkness, a world where every need from food, daily life, and faith to protection was met. And above all, they tell the story of resilience, creativity, and the communal spirit of people who chose not just to survive, but to live well underground. When walking through the deep corridors of Derinkuyu or any underground city in Cappadocia, the question almost forms itself. Why build something like this? Not just a few temporary shelters, but an immense system capable of sustaining tens of thousands of people and livestock with all the functions of a real city. Each stairway, each circular stone door, each ventilation shaft suggests that this was not the product of a fleeting idea, but the work of generations, executed with intention and care. A common and reasonable theory is war. Cappadocia lay along a major trade route linking empires and kingdoms from antiquity through the Middle Ages. Caravans, armies, and bands of raiders passed through regularly. People living above ground constantly faced the threat of sudden attack. An underground city allowed them to vanish from sight within minutes, taking with them food, livestock, and valuables. From down below they could live in safety, observe the situation through spy holes, and return only when the danger had passed. But war wasn't the only reason. Some researchers believe natural disasters played a major role as well. Cappadocia's climate is harsh, summers are hot and dry, winters are bitterly cold with sudden snowstorms. Underground, temperatures remain stable year-round, shielded from both heat and cold. With well-preserved food stores, residents could survive long, brutal winters or dry, unproductive summers without needing to go outside often. This turned the underground city into a kind of insurance policy against nature. Other theories are more mysterious. Some believe the system was first built in a time long before recorded history, perhaps by a vanished civilization. According to this view, later generations merely expanded and reused what was already there. As evidence, they point to tunnel sections with chisel marks that differ noticeably from the rest, or to strange structures with unclear purposes. Rooms too narrow to live in, yet too deep to be simple storage. Hallways ending in dead ends, as if they once connected to something that no longer exists. Another line of mystical theory centers on religion. Some believe that part of the underground city served for ritual or esoteric practice. A sealed, isolated space cut off from the outside world, where light and sound were entirely controlled, could foster mystical rites or spiritual experiences. In some areas, symbols have been found carved into the walls, bearing no resemblance to Christian or Islamic iconography, but rather strange geometric forms or unexplained motifs. Whatever the cause, war, disaster, or devotion, it's clear that maintaining these underground cities required a high level of communal cooperation. There could be no such thing as every family digging its own corner. The entire system had to be planned as a whole to ventilate air, manage water, and maintain security. This implies the presence of leadership groups or councils overseeing construction, determining the levels, assigning the use of space. They decided where to place storerooms, livestock pens, chapels, and how to position the stone doors to protect each sector. If you try to imagine a day when alarm was raised, the need for these cities becomes even clearer. News of approaching enemies or an incoming storm spreads quickly through the village. Everyone rushes to gather grain, water, tools, and animals, funneling into the main entrances. The stone doors are readied for closure. Within hours, the whole community has vanished from sight. From above, only empty homes and silent fields remain. Below, life continues. Meals are still cooked, children still play, adults still work, all within a space untouchable from the outside. What's interesting is that no single explanation suffices. Perhaps war was the original reason, and gradually people discovered the other advantages. Protection from nature, better food storage. Some sections may have been used for ritual, while the majority supported daily life. It's this multi-purpose nature that made underground cities an enduring part of life in Cappadocia for centuries. As you walk through a narrow passage and lay your hand on the cold stone, remember, you might be touching the very spot where someone once leaned while waiting for enemies to withdraw, or where a mother once stood, rocking her child to sleep as a snowstorm howled across the plains above. These stories are no longer spoken aloud, but they are still here, in every slab of stone, every breath of air. Whatever the original reason for their creation, the underground cities of Cappadocia prove one enduring truth. Humans will always find a way to adapt, to protect themselves, and to carve out a place they can call home, even if that place lies deep beneath the earth. When you stand in a deep corridor underground and hear your own footsteps echoing around you, it's hard to believe that what you see is only a small piece of the whole, because the underground cities of Cappadocia do not exist in isolation. They are connected by a network of tunnels stretching for dozens, perhaps hundreds of kilometers, winding silently through the soft, volcanic rock, like veins beneath the skin of this ancient land. Some tunnels are wide enough for two people to walk side by side. Others are so narrow that one must duck and squeeze through, and even an oil lamp held up close can't illuminate the full depth ahead. These tunnels can lead from Derinkuyu to Kemakli, and from there on to other towns, forming an interconnected system of shelters. People could move between cities without ever setting foot above ground, avoiding detection by enemies. To them, this was a lifeline used to transport food, share information, or evacuate entire communities when danger loomed. In certain places, the tunnels open up into larger chambers like hidden rest stops where travelers could rest, make a fire, and continue their journey. What makes this network even more mysterious is that it has never been fully mapped. Every time archaeologists discover a new passage, new questions arise. Where does this tunnel lead? How far does it go? Many entrances are buried beneath private homes or modern structures. Some segments are too narrow, too poorly ventilated, or too unstable to continue exploring. As a result, the map of the entire system remains a fragmented puzzle with large blank spaces still unfilled. There's a theory that the network not only links the underground cities of Cappadocia, but may stretch beyond the region, connecting to areas now buried or destroyed. If true, these tunnels might once have served as a massive underground transport system, not just for shelter, but for trade and covert communication. Some folk tales even speak of tunnels so long that travelers had to bring livestock and provisions, living underground for days before reaching the other end. As far-fetched as that might sound, the idea isn't entirely implausible. Even based on what has already been excavated, the construction and planning techniques of the ancients show they were more than capable of building such long and deep tunnels. The softness of tough stone made it feasible, and the cleverly designed ventilation shafts ensured fresh air flowed even through the most distant branches. Of course, maintaining and protecting a network like this would have required coordination between many communities, suggesting that the ties among Cappadocia's underground cities were stronger than we might imagine. But the true enigma of Cappadocia isn't just in the length of its tunnels. Many areas within the cities remain unexplored, blocked by stone doors or collapsed passages. In some places, archaeologists have found sealed pathways, perhaps closed off to protect treasure, preserve important documents, or simply for security. No one knows what lies behind those walls, expansive rooms filled with artifacts, tunnels leading to forgotten places, or just empty space. This uncertainty is part of what gives these cities their strange allure, the feeling that beneath every step there are stories yet untold. Even today, modern residents of Cappadocia occasionally stumble upon the network by accident. A family renovating their kitchen uncovers a small pit in the floor that opens into a deep corridor. A farmer digging a hole for planting finds a hollow pocket underground, filled with cool, stale air. Each discovery opens a new door into the past while raising another question. How many more doors are still hidden? If you walk through one of these dark corridors, your oil lamp illuminating just a few meters ahead, you'll understand why this network inspires both awe and unease. You might hear a faint breeze from another branch, or feel a chill drifting out of a turn no one's explored. It might be an ancient storage room or a passageway reaching farther than any modern traveler has ever gone. These untouched mysteries attract more than just archaeologists. They feed the imaginations of locals and travelers alike. They form a kind of parallel Cappadocia, a second world beneath the soft stone, silent but rich with stories. One day, perhaps technology will allow us to map the entire system, measuring every meter, unlocking every door. But perhaps part of it will always remain out of reach, as a quiet reminder that the past always keeps something for itself. And when you emerge from the underground city, stepping once again into the blinding surface light, it's entirely possible that there are still tunnels beneath your feet running under homes, fields, and familiar roads. They are there, in silence, like invisible threads, stitching together past and present, waiting for someone patient and curious enough to follow their path. In the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, where the first cities of humanity rose from mud and baked brick, the Sumerians believed that dreams were not simply the byproduct of a resting mind. They were delicate doorways into the realm of the gods, a space where humans might receive guidance, warnings, or commands that could not be ignored. In the long nights of ancient Mesopotamia, as desert winds swept over clay rooftops, people believed that Enki, the god of wisdom and water, or Nana, the moon, God might quietly slip into their minds, leaving traces in the form of strange, vivid images. To the Sumerians, dreams came in many forms. There were good dreams that brought omens of fortune, a field heavy with grain, a river teeming with fish, or the smiling face of a god. These were seen as promises of good things to come, and were often shared the next morning with joy and hope. But there were also bad dreams, a house consumed by fire, floodwaters destroying the fields, or wild beasts attacking. These were seen as warnings, sometimes even threats. When someone had such a dream, they would often seek out a dream interpreter to find a way to neutralize it. perhaps through a small offering, or sometimes through more elaborate rituals. Dream interpretation was not a matter of guesswork. The Sumerians left behind texts on clay tablets recording hundreds of dream scenarios and their meanings. One tablet might read, "If a man dreams of drinking water from a golden vessel, this is an omen of prosperity. If a man dreams of being bitten by a snake, it signals the presence of a hidden enemy." These catalogues were like dictionaries of the other world, helping interpreters navigate the chaotic imagery of the dreaming mind. The role of the dream interpreter, known as a shulmu, was more than reading meanings off a tablet. They asked questions about the dreamer's life: who appeared in the dream, what season it occurred in, and even the position of the stars and planets that night. A dream of falling rain could mean different things in the dry season versus the rainy one. This sensitivity made dream interpretation into an art, one that wove together knowledge, experience, and intuition. The Sumerians believed that some dreams were sent, given directly by the gods. These often occurred when someone slept inside a temple, in a practice known as incubation. The dreamer would purify themselves, fast, pray, and then sleep in a sacred space, hoping to receive a message. Sometimes the message came as an image, other times as a lingering emotion, a deep sense of peace, or an unshakable anxiety upon waking. But dreams could also be the work of malevolent forces, demons, or angry spirits in the Sumerian view. If someone suffered from recurring nightmares, it was believed that they were under supernatural harassment. To protect themselves, families would hang charms above the bed, usually in the form of protective deities or fierce guardian creatures, and recite prayers before sleep. Small oil lamps would be kept burning through the night, their light seen as a defense against the dark and the spirits that dwelled within it. The experience of dreaming could be deeply personal. Imagine a farmer named Lugal living on the outskirts of Ur. One night, after planting his wheat, he dreams he is standing by the riverbank as the water rises and sweeps away all the boats. He wakes with a sense of unease. That morning, he visits a shulmu in the marketplace. The interpreter listens carefully, glances at the sky, notes the position of the moon, and consults his clay tablet. He says, "The rising water is a sign of an unusual flood. Strengthen the banks of your fields and prepare a high place to store your grain." Lugal does as advised, and weeks later, when the river surges, his harvest is safe. The story, when told and retold, only reinforces the belief that dreams truly carry messages from the divine. It wasn't only common folk who trusted in dreams, Sumerian kings took them seriously as well. Some tablets record rulers making great decisions based on dreams. A king might launch a military campaign after dreaming that the god of war stood beside him, handing him a sword. Another might cancel an invasion after dreaming of a scorched field. In a society where gods were thought to intervene directly in human affairs, dreams were not optional. They were essential channels of divine communication. When night fell across the Mesopotamian plains and the oil lamps in homes flickered out, the Sumerians entered the world of dreams with a special kind of readiness. They knew that what happened in the night could affect their crops, their health, even the fate of the whole community. And when dawn broke, its light creeping through the cracks in earthen walls, the stories from the dream world would be told, recorded, and passed on, linking human lives to the gods through the fragile thread of sleep. On the banks of the Nile, where the night breeze carries the damp scent of reeds and the soft sound of water lapping against the shore, the ancient Egyptians held their own beliefs about dreams. To them, a dream was the moment when the Ka'al, vital part of the human soul, left the body and wandered through the invisible world. As Ka departed, it could encounter gods, ancestors, or entities not of the living realm. These encounters left traces in the mind upon waking, what we call dreams. Thus, a dream was not a mere illusion, but evidence of a true journey, one that only the soul could undertake. The Egyptians believed that one could guide where the car would go during the night by preparing both the body and the mind. The sacred practice of sleeping within temples, known as incubation, was one of the most revered ways to meet the gods through dreams. Those who wished to partake would bathe in the waters of the Nile, wear clean garments, and abstain from certain foods in the days leading up to the ritual. They would arrive at the temple in the evening, bringing offerings, often scented oils, bread, or a small statue of the deity they hoped to encounter. Inside the temple, the only light came from flickering oil lamps. The air carried a faint aroma of resin and smoldering wood. The dream seeker would be led into a quiet chamber, sometimes laid with reed mats or furnished with a low wooden bed. There they would sleep, trusting that when the car slipped from their body, it would find its way to the god dwelling within the temple. In sleep, if fortune favored them, they would see visions or hear words that brought healing or insight for whatever burden they carried. Such dreams were often interpreted using dream books, scrolls, or inscriptions compiled by priests and scholars over generations. Each entry described a dream and offered its meaning. For example, to dream of a bird flying into the house foretold the arrival of an important guest. To dream of water flooding a room might warn of illness or hardship. These dream books were not merely tools for interpretation. They were archives of stories and signs, shaping how Egyptians understood the world around them. In their medical practice, dreams were also a form of healing. Certain temples, like the Temple of Imhotep, were renowned for cures received through dreams. The sick would come to sleep there, hoping for divine guidance toward a remedy. Upon waking, they would recount their dreams to the temple priests, who would interpret them and advise a course of action, perhaps a specific herb, or a symbolic act such as bathing at dawn in a sacred part of the river, or burning a particular incense at home. The Egyptians also knew that not all dreams were clear or comforting. Some were fragmented and elusive, a doorway, a sandy path, a drop of blood falling into water. In such cases, the meaning depended heavily on the dreamer's life. A merchant dreaming of rising water might be told to change his trade route. A farmer might be urged to prepare for flood season. Dreams were riddles, and the car was the one who brought back scattered clues from another world. But sometimes the car did not return peacefully. Egyptians believed nightmares were signs that the car had encountered something troubling, an angry deity or a wandering hostile spirit. In such cases, the dreamer would undergo cleansing rituals, bathing and burning fragrant herbs to purge the lingering threat. Some placed protective amulets by their beds, often carved with the image of the god Bez, guardian of sleep and banisher of evil. If you imagine a night at Karnak or Luxor, you can begin to feel this world. Outside, the moon casts its glow on towering columns, their shadows stretching like arms across the ground. Inside, the halls are silent, broken only by the footsteps of those who came seeking dreams. They lie down, close their eyes, and allow the car to drift away past walls carved with hieroglyphs, through unseen doorways, to where the gods are waiting. And when dawn arrives, new stories are added to the dream book's entries in a growing journal that bridges the realm of the living and the divine. In ancient Greece, among olive-covered hills and sunlit marble roads, there existed a form of healing that was both medical and spiritual treatment through dreams. At the heart of this practice were the temples of Asclepius, the god of medicine and healing. To the Greeks, Asclepius was more than a symbol of medical skill. He was a bridge between the human world and the divine forces of restoration. Those who came to his sanctuaries had often tried every other remedy without success. They hoped that in sleep, Asclepius would visit them and offer a cure or guidance. The most renowned temple of Asclepius stood at Epidaurus, a vast complex nestled in the forested hills, comprising not only the temple, but also baths, a gymnasium, lodgings, and most importantly, the abaton, a long, quiet, dimly lit space where the sick would sleep in hopes of meeting the god. Before being allowed to enter the abaton, patients had to undergo a series of purifying rituals. They would bathe thoroughly, wear a light chiton, fast for several days, and sometimes offer a small animal sacrifice to show devotion. As night fell, the abaton became bathed in the soft glow of oil lamps. The air was scented with burning cedarwood and herbs, creating an atmosphere both sacred and calming. The sick lay on mats of animal hide, closed their eyes, and let their minds drift. It was believed that in sleep, Asclepius or his sacred snakes, symbols of rebirth and healing would appear. Some dreamed the god touched their wounds, others dreamed they drank a strange liquid, or were led to a hidden spring. The next morning, dreamers would recount their visions to the temple priests. These priests were both spiritual leaders and men of medical knowledge. They interpreted the dreams and offered guidance based on what Asclepius had revealed. If the dream mentioned a plant, the priests would harvest and prepare it. If it called for a ritual, they would help carry it out. Often, the healing process combined physical care with the reinforcement of spiritual faith. Surviving records from Epidaurus describe miraculous cures, a blind man regaining sight after dreaming of the god touching his eyes, a woman long infertile becoming pregnant after the god handed her a baby in a dream. While modern science may question the accuracy of these accounts, they illustrate the deep psychological and emotional power of belief in recovery. But not everyone dreamed what they hoped for. Some had vague or meaningless dreams, or none at all. In those cases, the priests encouraged them to stay longer, repeat the rituals, or adjust their diet and lifestyle to help open the mind. To the Greeks, a lack of a dream didn't mean abandonment by the god, only that the right moment had not yet come. Interestingly, the temple experience was not purely mystical. Asclepius's sanctuaries incorporated practical healthcare. The temple grounds included exercise areas, herbal gardens, and bathing facilities. Patients were encouraged to walk, eat moderately, and relax. These components, combined with a peaceful setting and belief in divine aid, likely contributed to genuine healing. Imagine yourself as a pilgrim arriving at Epidaurus. You walk along a white stone path, flanked by tall columns, the scent of pine and wildflowers in the air. Inside the abaton, cool darkness and quiet surround you. You lie down, your heartbeat slows and your mind quiets. In the stillness, a warm presence seems to approach. Whether it is a dream or a true visit from Asclepius, when you open your eyes at dawn, the world feels changed, or at least your sense of self has been transformed. As ancient civilizations turned the final pages of their golden eras, humanity's view of dreams began to shift. In Sumer, Egypt, and Greece, dreams had once been sacred messages, spoken words from the gods or signs that the soul had wandered through an invisible world during the night. But as philosophy and science gradually replaced the old systems of belief, dreams began to be examined under a different light, less divine, yet no less mysterious. In Roman times, the influence of Greece remained strong, but dreams were no longer seen as absolute prophecies. Thinkers like Cicero and Artemidorus continued to record and categorize dreams, yet they began to question the truth behind these messages. Artemidorus, for example, in his work Oneirocritica, divided dreams into two types: those directly related to a person's life, health, work, relationships, and those symbolic in nature that required interpretation. He did not reject the role of the divine, but he opened the door to the idea that dreams might arise from the mind itself, reflecting hidden fears and desires. In the Christian Middle Ages of Europe, dreams were placed within a framework of morality and religion. Some dreams were seen as revelations from God or the saints, while many others were suspected to be temptations from the devil. People still recorded their dreams in journals or shared them with priests, but the way they were interpreted now depended heavily on religious doctrine and judgment. Meanwhile, in the Islamic world, dream interpretation continued to flourish, building on ancient texts while incorporating new insights from Arabic philosophy and medicine. The Renaissance and Enlightenment pushed dreams into yet another direction. With the rise of empirical science, people began seeking explanations rooted in physiology. Dreams could be reactions of the brain at rest, the result of slow digestion, or responses to external stimuli like sound or scent. Though the poetry and mystery of dreams didn't disappear, they were now draped in the language of science, and the link to the divine began to fade. In the 19th and 20th centuries, dreams returned to center stage in a new realm: psychology. Sigmund Freud, in The Interpretation of Dreams, laid the foundation for the modern understanding of dreams, not as prophecies, but as the royal road to the unconscious. For Freud, dreams expressed repressed desires and internal conflicts, wrapped in symbols and narrative disguises. Carl Jung, once a student and later a rival of Freud, expanded this view, suggesting that dreams were not only personal, but also connected to a collective unconscious, a shared reservoir of symbols and myths that had existed since ancient times. Modern studies of dreams have continued to branch in many directions. Neuroscientists examine the brain's electrical activity during sleep, identifying REM and non-REM stages, and noting that dreams often occur when the brain is nearly as active as when awake. Psychologists have found that dreams help us process emotions, strengthen memory, and even simulate hypothetical situations. In a way, they are still messages, but now seen as notes the mind writes to itself, rather than divine whispers from afar. Even though the ancient beliefs have faded, their legacy still lingers. We still speak of prophetic dreams when reality mirrors a dream. We still wear lucky charms or hesitate to speak of bad dreams aloud for fear they might come true. Habits that trace back to beliefs thousands of years old. Symbols from Sumer, Egypt, and Greece still appear in books, films, and art, sometimes unchanged, sometimes transformed, but always compelling. If someone from Sumer 4,000 years ago stepped into your room tonight and heard you describe a strange dream, they might not find it strange at all. They might reach for a clay tablet, search for meaning, or offer a warning or piece of sacred advice. Today, you might tell the same dream to a psychologist and receive an analysis rooted in memory, trauma, or desire. These two approaches, one mystical, one rational, speak different languages, but they share the same impulse: to use dreams as a way to understand ourselves. Dreams in that sense remain a bridge. In ancient times, they linked humans to the gods and the unseen world. Today, they connect consciousness with the unconscious, science with art, the individual with the shared human experience. And when night falls, whether you live in a modern city or an ancient village, whether your mind is filled with reason or belief, you still step onto that bridge, carrying your questions, your hopes, your fears, and return at dawn with a story, an image, or a feeling without a name. And so, from the glowing heat of the blacksmith's fire to the sacred mysteries of ancient alchemy, from the stone cities beneath Cappadocia to the dreams that once carried voices of gods, we've wandered through time in quiet steps. These were not tales of glory, but the small, steady rhythms of human life across centuries. That's the heart of this channel, a place for long, boring history for sleep, told by your sleepy historian. If you found rest in these stories, you can subscribe to Historian Sleepy 365, so there's always another calm journey waiting for you. Now let the echoes of the forge fade away. Breathe slowly, let your body grow heavy, and drift into your own dreams, where history becomes quiet enough to carry you into sleep.